When we take those numbers, those percentages, and we put them into a financial model, we begin to see the exact dollars that can flow through to an organization. Now these numbers are based on averages, and they're based on a number of different assumptions. But you can begin to see that if you spend $10 million a year, that the governance cost would expect to be 5% of that on top. So then you'd have a $10.5 million expense line to pay for $10 million in contracts, and that would be a very normal situation in outsourcing. If we look at the reductions that we just talked about on the previous slide, we have the direct cost reductions, which is the 10% in bill rates, which flows through directly to $1 million. And then if we decrease the oversight costs 12%, that's another $60,000, which again, right off the top is a 10.6% reduction off the $10 million. Now we get into the indirect cost reductions, and things get a little more difficult to measure, and especially because they don't necessarily flow through into something that we can measure financially. But for example, vendor responsiveness. Having a vendor that can respond and be accurate and give us information on time can have as much as a 7% impact on the relationship. And we begin to see that simply having them responsive to us, giving us good, accurate estimates, giving us timely information, being able to put people on site, being able to solve projects, being able to bring innovation and industry expertise, and some of those capabilities can have a significant impact on the financials. Also on process standardization, again, we're talking here about the change in process, such as the capability maturity model in ITIL. An example of how this might take effect is found in the offshore market. For many years now, the service providers in the offshore market have talked about the fact that they're certified at level 5 on the capability maturity model. And that's wonderful, and we certainly want to promote and encourage increased certification and standardization. The challenge is that the average IT organization in North America runs between level 0 and level 1, which means that they really have very little process. Now, it is impossible for an IT organization to be level 1 and for the actual work being done by a provider to be done at level 5. And so what happens is, even though the vendors are certified at level 5, most of the work that is done gets done at about a level 3 on the capability maturity model. And so that certification means very little in terms of what actually gets done. And it's not because the vendors are somehow being negligent or deceptive, but it's the fact that they have to work with the IT organization in some way in which the IT organization can work. And the ability to bring in that process change, the ability to bring in the discipline and the structure and the repeatability actually drives costs out over the long term. And so as we look at process standardization, we find that working with an outsourcing provider often drives increased standardization within the IT organization, not because the IT organization was negligent or deficient or didn't know how, but simply because the need to work with an internal organization and a third party requires some degree of alignment that would not have otherwise been required. And so as we put together this model, you can see that on average we can see that a 22.1% savings can be realized from a vendor consolidation given all of the assumptions that we've put into this model.
As we speak with clients, we often find that IT organizations and purchasing professionals and other executives will say, yes, we agree with all of these things that you're saying, and we agree that there are cost savings, we agree that there is a need for consolidation, we agree that we should be streamlining, measuring, and optimizing, but we intend to do this ourselves. We think we can do this internally, and that's great. At Collabera, we applaud any organization that can do that. In our experience, though, an internal organization often isn't able to pull the trigger on this as efficiently or effectively as an external party. And the reason for that isn't understanding how to do it. It isn't understanding why to do it. It isn't even understanding when to do it. The challenge is that This is change, and in any type of change, in any type of organization, change requires some kind of impetus. It requires some kind of momentum or some kind of stimulus. And that change is something that an external party can often bring to the table more effectively. So in our experience, we find that while internal organizations know how to do this, they often don't get that momentum or that executive support. One client called this the perpetually postponed project. In other words, everyone agreed that it was a good idea, but nobody ever felt that the internal organization had the time or the resources to get around to it. And for that reason, we feel like as an external third party, we're able to bring in the resources much more effectively. Another reason for that is that an outsourcing relationship takes place over a long period of time. It is something that extends over a number of years, and there is a certain amount of relationship, a certain relationship that needs to exist between the two parties. And sometimes change requires a little more of a confrontational approach. It requires a little more of a drive or a push than might naturally be a part of those ongoing relationships. And so sometimes a third party who can come in and quote-unquote be the bad guy helps out by letting the two organizations retain somewhat of a working relationship and letting someone else drive or impose some kind of a change to that normal relationship. In addition, as an external firm, we have experience helping other companies do this, and we have seen other companies do it. We've negotiated other agreements, and we are able to bring in both what IT organizations can and have done successfully, and into the negotiations what other companies have negotiated with sourcing providers. So we know that they're willing to do things. We know what kinds of compromises and changes they're willing to make, and we bring that expertise in as we help roll out this kind of project for a client. In rolling out this kind of project, the first thing we need to do is define certain roles that will inevitably exist between the client and the consultant, and also things where we know how they will be done, we know who that will be doing them, and things that at least at the beginning point we don't know necessarily, we don't have all the information that will be needed. So as we go through this kind of a methodology, we have a system that we approach. We use a six-step process within Collabera to consolidate service providers. We always begin by understanding two dimensions of the problem. The first one is the company requirements. Now, in the ideal case, the company, the IT organization, has already been providing the services to the business units. And in the ideal case, those services are already pretty much what's going to be needed. But inevitably, in every company, there are contracts that are out of date, there are services that are misaligned, and there are expectations that are either misunderstood or incorrectly defined. And so going back and reviewing those requirements is an important part of a consolidation process. We expect that the results of this consolidation will last for years. Not weeks, not months, but years. And so it's important that we go back and do a check to make sure that we are providing the services that are needed. In many cases, these things are well understood and well defined, but in other companies, they're sort of expressed as innuendos and very much indirect services. The other dimension, the second dimension that we want to focus on, is understanding what service providers the company is already receiving. So who is providing services? What services are they providing? What's the inventory of contracts? What are the relationships? Is the vendor performing well or is it performing poorly? And start to come up with that list so that we can reconcile these two and essentially develop a gap analysis. And that's the third step, really, is to determine what do we need to be able to provide, what do we already have provided, and start to map those into a new solution set of a consolidated set of providers that will meet the needs of the business at this point in time. The fourth step then is to actually go through and select the providers. Now, in some cases, that will merely mean expanding contracts with current providers.